The motive for this strategic pivot is not ideology. It is a balance sheet calculation. Nations do not initiate conflict. They are mathematically certain to lose. When a state's internal liabilities and the prohibitive cost of conventional warfare create a solvency crisis, it is forced to pivot to asymmetry. It is a function of weakness, not strength. Observe the Russian Federation. Analysts at CSIs have noted that the extreme kinetic cost of a protracted conflict, coupled with significant domestic liabilities, forces a strategic reevaluation. Unable to sustain a symmetric, multi-front confrontation, the logical protocol is to find a cheaper, higher leverage vector that targets the adversary's primary weakness. This solvency-driven pivot becomes the blueprint. This blueprint is now aimed directly at the United States. The adversary's calculus is simple. America's primary liability is its own decaying financial base. We see systemic domestic decay in the form of a nationwide affordability crisis, Source 2, and the inability to fund basic infrastructure, forcing LA firefighters to beg voters for funding after decades of underinvestment, Source 4. Therefore, the adversary's strategy is to accelerate this insolvency by creating physical threats that demand an expensive kinetic response, like the expanding U.S. military presence in the Middle East, Source 1. They force the U.S. to hemorrhage capital. This is not a miscalculation. It is a deliberate strategy to exploit the feedback loop where military overextension compounds domestic financial collapse. The asymmetric pivot to target the dollar via mechanisms like the proposed BRICS digital currency linkage, Source 3, is the inevitable and most dangerous phase of this solvency war. The kinetic cost equation has inverted. The Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, has modeled the fatal exchange rate. A $5 million main battle tank is now a liability, targeted by a $500 FPV drone. This is not warfare. It is asset liquidation at a 10,000 to 1 ratio, billed directly to a treasury already facing a solvency crisis after decades of underinvestment back home, Source 4. This vector is known as the democratization of violence. The state's monopoly on projecting lethal standoff force has been broken by consumer technology. An adversary no longer requires a symmetric industrial base to challenge American hardware. They need only a supply chain of commercially available parts. This transforms the battlefield into a zero-sum economic ledger where the U.S. is forced into an asymmetric cost imposition strategy against itself. While the U.S. expands its kinetic posture in regions like the Middle East, Source 1, it is responding to the symptom, not the disease. Every multi-million-dollar interceptor missile fired at a low-cost threat is a direct liquidity drain from a system where an affordability crisis grips the population, Source 2. The blueprint is mathematical. Force the target to hemorrhage its wealth on physical defense, accelerating the domestic insolvency that makes it vulnerable in the first place. The trap is not kinetic, it is economic. The 21st century battlefield is not a geographic location, it is a systemic condition. Adversaries have shifted the conflict space from kinetic engagement to the solvency of the state itself. We are now observing the deployment of proxy laboratories, controlled environments where non-military systemic warfare protocols are tested and refined. These are not the primary conflict zones. They are the staging grounds. Reports from entities like RUSI confirm this shift in strategic doctrine. The objective in these gray zones is to beta test financial and social tools designed to operate entirely outside the dollar-based architecture. The Reserve Bank of India's proposal to link BRICS digital currencies is not a theoretical exercise. It is the software being deployed in these labs, Source 3. They are stress testing new financial plumbing while the United States is still trying to patch the old leaking pipes. Analysts at CSIS note that regional instability, whether it's economic friction in Canada or social fracturing in South Africa, is now monitored as a live-fire exercise. Adversaries are not causing this instability. They are studying it. They observe how a system under strain responds to specific pressures, collecting data to refine the financial weapons that will ultimately be aimed at the primary target, the U.S. Treasury. This is the core of the asymmetric strategy. While America is lured into kinetic overextension in the Middle East, Source 1, the real war is being fought in these labs. The enemy does not need to bomb Los Angeles when decades of underinvestment have already crippled its emergency services. Source 4. The gray zone is where they perfect the low-cost, high-impact financial accelerants designed to exploit the domestic affordability crisis. Source 2. And turn internal decay into systemic collapse. The final escalation protocol is not a choice. It is a pre-programmed response. The doctrine is known as launch on warning. According to strategic frameworks analyzed by CSIS, this protocol dictates that if early warning systems detect an incoming strategic missile attack, the United States must launch its own arsenal before the incoming warheads can destroy its silos. It is a use it or lose it scenario, hardwired to prevent a decapitation strike. This Cold War logic, however, contains a terminal vulnerability in the digital age. An adversary does not need to launch a multi-trillion-dollar nuclear missile. They only need to launch a sophisticated cyber attack that spoofs the satellite and radar data feeds, creating a ghost signature of an inbound attack. This creates the fog of digital war. The system's sensors are now blinded, or worse, feeding it false certainty. The decision-making window for a president and their commanders is less than 12 minutes. With the primary sensor network compromised, the protocol still demands a decision. The commander is now forced into a binary trap. Option 1. Trust the data is fake, bet the entire nation on that assumption, and risk total annihilation if wrong. Option 2. Follow the protocol and launch the counterstrike, initiating global thermonuclear war based on what could be a digital illusion. The adversary has achieved maximum strategic leverage, not with a kinetic weapon, but with an algorithm. This is the mathematical certainty of the system's failure point. The adversary's primary vector is not military, it is mathematical. While U.S. assets are positioned for kinetic conflict, Source 1, the domestic solvency crisis accelerates, evidenced by collapsing municipal services, Source 4, and a strained consumer base, Source 2. The strategic objective is not to win a war, but to trigger a default. This is achieved by provoking high-cost kinetic deployments that accelerate the treasury drain, while parallel financial architecture is constructed to bypass the dollar. Source 3. The next phase is not escalation, it is calibration. To test the system's brittleness and response protocols, a non-kinetic attribution impossible event is required. Within 12 months, expect a cascading failure of a Tier 1 U.S. logistics hub, a coordinated digital and power infrastructure blackout targeting a major West Coast port. It will be officially attributed to aging infrastructure or a non-state ransomware attack, making a kinetic response illogical. Its true function is to be a calibration shot, measuring the economic bleed rate and the paralysis of the command structure before the terminal attack on the currency is launched.